Fantasy Football Podcast. We are on episode 41. We are going into week 10 of the NFL season. We are unfortunately without Brian, the fantasy foreseer, so it was just me today. We're in a small studio setup instead of our standard staring into the computer camera mode. So I'm your monotone master. You can find our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media, Instagram and TikTok as Why You're Wrong FFB, and on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. But let's just get into some headlines that happened this week, because week 9 was just another continuation of what is going on in the NFL with the way these games are unfolding. So I just want to start off with saying, imagine just having the blueprint for fantasy success, and then your guy gets hurt, and then his backup has a massive fantasy game. I'm referring to the Cardinals 49ers game where you didn't have Kyler Murray, you didn't have AJ Green, you didn't have DeAndre Hopkins. The process was Colt McCoy is going to have to dump the ball off and hand the ball off to Chase Edmonds for the majority of the game for them to have a chance. And then we saw Chase Edmonds get injured on the first play with an ankle sprain, and then James Conner just continued to have a day, going for 96 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, in addition to 5 catches for 77 yards and 1 through the air, practically having a 37 to 40 point game depending on what scoring format you're in, which is just incredible for a backup running back to have. Who knew we'd be at this point in the season where Chase Edmonds was the one getting hurt and James Conner was the one having big days? If you asked us at the beginning of the season, we probably would have said that would have easily flip-flopped. Then the Titans lose Derrick Henry, but still somehow steamroll the Rams, but via defense. 2 early interceptions, including a pick 6, had the Titans to an early lead, which is just kind of head-scratching as the Rams fan base. I'm not a Rams fan. But the Rams just could not find the end zone, basically having 3 field goals throughout the entire game and then finding the end zone in garbage time. I also want to add in A.J. Brown had 11 targets, but only mustered 5 for 42. He did have an overthrown touchdown in the end zone early in the game, which could have definitely helped out his fantasy day. He was just overthrown a little bit by Ryan Tannehill. But he also had some more bad drops, which is just kind of getting to the point where A.J. Brown feels like Braylon Edwards of old, where he can get open, he's athletic enough, he can catch the ball, he can have a big day, but he's got bricks for hands, so you just have to hope they're in the right mold at the right time. And then Big Ben is trying his absolute best to just be frustratingly mediocre. The Steelers almost lost to Justin Fields and the Bears last night. As we saw, Big Ben likes to find his 1 or 2 favorite targets and just hyper-target them the entire game. Pat Freiermuth has 8 catches and 3 touchdowns in Eric Ebron's absence, had 2 touchdowns in last night's game, projecting him to be the tight end 1 for the week. Ben continues to show that he hyper-targets his favorite player, which was usually Deontay Johnson, who's had at least 10 catches in almost every single game, being one of only 2 wide receivers that have double-digit fantasy points in every single game this season. But this just happened to be that one game where he didn't get all those targets. He barely cracked double-digit points. Only if you're playing in full PPR did he get over 10. It's concerning to watch this offense operate with a quarterback that's extremely mediocre. It's just going to be really fun to watch next season when Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of this team, because that probably just means huge things for Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and Najee Harris. So if you're in a dynasty league, you might want to try trading for these players as they're struggling with Big Ben at quarterback, because if they do get that upgrade at quarterback going into next season, this could be a very scary offense going forward, but then you're also betting on them getting Aaron Rodgers. At 4th, the Broncos embarrassed the Cowboys, practically shutting them out 30-0 for the entire game. Then Dak salvaged his fantasy day by having 2 garbage time touchdowns to a wide receiver not named Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb, and was just super frustrating if you're a fantasy manager of a Cowboy on Sunday. Getting into our Devil's Advocate team that we always like to talk about. So since Tua got hurt, we threw in Derek Carr at the last second. Brandon Ayuk replaced Mike Evans this week. Jamar Chase had a really bad day, but Jonathan Taylor really just carried this team. So at Derek Carr at QB, Brandon Ayuk and Jamar Chase for wide receiver, Jonathan Taylor and Boston Scott at running back, Zach Ertz as tight end, and Melvin Gordon as our flex. This team got to 91.6 points, where me and Brian both took L's to this team. I only managed to score 57 in this league. Brian got to 85, but both losing to the Devil's Advocate team, bringing my record to 5-4 and Brian to 3-6. But just some impactful news. Right before I started recording, I got an update that Nick Chubb and DeMarcus Felton have tested positive for COVID. Both players are vaccinated, so they just have to get two negative tests within 24 hours before they're eligible to play on Sunday, which means Dearness Johnson could be in for another big day, being one of the only running backs left in the room. The Raiders are going to sign Deshaun Jackson. Russell Wilson has been cleared to play, so that's great news for DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett managers. And Odell Beckham has been placed on waivers. Right now, it's most likely that he might sign with the Seahawks, which, being a Seahawks fan, I really just don't want them to sign Odell Beckham. I don't want to deal with his headaches that he causes in the locker room. Wide receiver is one of our last needs. I just feel like there's so many other positions that the Seahawks need to improve on that bringing Odell Beckham is like trying to just fix a sinking ship with a slap of duct tape. It sounds nice on paper if this was 5 years ago, but I just don't want this right now for the team. Some injury-related news. Sam Darnold is day-to-day with a shoulder injury. Trevor Lawrence is limited with a low ankle sprain. Chase Edmonds may be going on short-term IR. And you just have to kind of monitor all these other guys like Zach Moss, who got a concussion. David Montgomery came off of IR and played pretty decently in his first game against the Steelers, but they're on a bye week, so you're not going to be able to count on Bears running backs. And moving forward, the studs of the week. So this was a weird week in the NFL, and I'll get to that at one point. So for quarterbacks, Matt Ryan, who's just been hot and cold all season, had 28.5 against the big Saints defense. Justin Herbert threw down 31.6. Lamar Jackson had another big day rushing the ball, had 32.6 points on the week. Then at wide receiver, I honestly put 5 studs on the week because there's no way, unless you're in a super deep league, that you played one of these 5 receivers this week. Malik Turner had 17.8 points, going 5 for 33 and 2. That was the Cowboys wide receiver who got those 2 garbage time touchdowns. Darnell Mooney, 19.1 against the Steelers last night, 3 for 41 and a touchdown. Then, I can't even pronounce his first name, but the Falcons wide receiver Zacchaeus, 19.3 points, going 3 for 58 and 2 touchdowns. Then, of course, the week I dropped Devontae Smith because of a roster casualty. He goes 20.1, 5 for 116 and 1. The Chargers also were down defensive backs, and the Eagles had to come back to try to win the game. So that is the only path to success for Devonta Smith. And it's just his best game of his rookie year. All the other games have been super disappointing, so it's very much a boomer bust sort of player at this point. Then who would have guessed that Elijah Moore, rookie for the New York Jets, was going to be wide receiver 1 on the week with 23.9 points, going 7 for 84 and 2 touchdowns. Then at running back, Nick Chubb had a massive day with 29.3. Jonathan Taylor had that massive Thursday night game versus the Jets with 33 points. And then James Conner, as I mentioned earlier, had a day going 37.8 points. Just a massive 3-touchdown game for the Cardinals. And then at tight end, Darren Waller was 4th on the week, missing a touchdown catch that would have been a contested catch. I only threw Minier because it would have been a week where the top 3 tight ends projected for the season would have been the top 3 tight ends for this week. But Pat Freiermuth had something else to say about it. Because Travis Kelce was the 3rd best tight end this week with 15.3. George Kittle in his return at 17.1. With the 2-touchdown game for the Steelers, Pat Freiermuth had 18.8, continuing his great rookie season at tight end for the Steelers. But I just want to note his past 2 games that have been great have both been because Eric Ebron has been out dealing with an injury. That's just something where, as long as Ebron is out, it feels like Freiermuth is a great streaming option if he's still in the stream for you. Or he's a great just low-end tight end 1 that could catch a touchdown or get enough targets to be relevant, as long as Eric Ebron is still out. At kicker, Matt Gay had 12 points, Brandon McManus had 13, and Chris Boswell had 16 last night on some long field goals for the Steelers. Then on defense, the Dolphins had 17, the Browns got a nice pick 6 for 18, and so did the Patriots, who had 2 interceptions, 1 going for a touchdown at 20 points, as they practically just held their opponent to nothing at all. Then there's always some duds on the week now. This week hurt at running back with Aaron Jones being outplayed by A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones only mustered 5.3 points. Boston Scott, who had 2 touchdowns last week, looking like the Eagles' number 1 running back without Miles Sanders, totally flip-flopped, only had 4 points this week. Kenneth Gainwell got the touchdown, and Jordan Howard was the lead running back for some reason. Then Darnell Henderson had 7.3 for the Rams. The Rams offense just as a whole did not look good. Cooper Kupp helped you salvage a day with a bunch of garbage time targets and yards. And the last touchdown made Matthew Stafford not a total dud on the week, but he didn't help you win either. At wide receiver, this list was huge. Mike Williams had another terrible week at 6.8. CeeDee Lamb, 3.3. Amari Cooper was probably around the 5.7 range in full PPR, also terrible. Deebo Samuel, 8.8. Adam Thielen, 7.1. Devontae Adams, 7.2. Then Tyreek Hill only getting 5.3 is just another weird vibe going on with the Chiefs, how this entire team for some reason has just been struggling ever since Clyde Edwards-Helaire got hurt. That's just a coincidence, but their entire offense has just not been great for the past month. Jacoby Myers, 1.3. DJ Moore, 6.1. Robbie Anderson had 1 catch for 2 yards, giving him 0.7. Jamar Chase, 5.9. Then at quarterback, Josh Allen, who should have been the highest quarterback of the week if you were looking at projections, 11.5. Derek Carr, 12.3. Jordan Love, if you played him against the Chiefs, 12.9. And then Joe Burrow had a miserable day versus the Browns at 9.3. Then at tight ends, it's hard to find a tight end dud because most tight ends average around 8 points. But the bigger tight ends, if you're relying on them, Dallas Goedert, 5.8 points, and Mark Andrews, only 6.9, and a big day for Lamar. It's just what happens with tight ends. They don't always have big games. You're just really hoping for a consistent 8 points across the board, and then you're hoping for 10 points or above from the bigger tight ends. Some flex pickups for the week that you might be looking at. So Devontae Freeman might be the only relevant name. He has 3 weeks of 10 plus points, pretty much just being saved with a touchdown and some rushing upside with the passing game. The Ravens still are as a giant question mark at running back. I would only feel comfortable playing Devonta Freeman again if Murray is still out. It's a short week. They play on Thursday versus the Dolphins. So if Devonta Freeman still is the number 1 running back on the team with Murray being out, then you could flex him, but I wouldn't feel super confident flexing him. Jordan Howard versus Denver. So the thing is, the Eagles have just been frustrating fantasy managers all year at the running back position. I think Jordan Howard might be the only reliable one. I don't feel confident saying that. It's just with the way they've cycled Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, and Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard at least seems to be the battering ram of the offense right now. So I feel like he'd be the only confident one playing. Now, after me saying that, watch Kenneth Gainwell have a great game versus Denver. But if you want a more solid guy to play this week, the Jets are the worst team in the NFL against running back. Zach Moss is still dealing with a concussion. So Devin Singletary could be a great play versus the Jets this week if Zach Moss is still out with an injury. And then with the news I stated earlier in the show, if Nick Chubb and Felton both can't play due to COVID, Dearness Johnson could be another just a volume start. The Patriots defense will probably key in on something about the Browns offense to basically stop them from scoring 40 points like they did this past week. But Dearness Johnson could be a volume play if he's still out there on waivers. And if you still have fab left over and you need a win this week, he's definitely worth someone investing probably 10 to 15 at the minimum on if you really need him for this week. Then some more running backs you could be looking at more wide receivers. Rashad Bateman versus Miami. He's had 2 back-to-back decent weeks, at least in full PPR. And then outside of that, it really just, you're throwing a dart into the dark with these other guys. Christian Kirk could have a big, long touchdown. Brandon Ayuk's been emerging. He's basically finally being used in the offense. He changed his practicing habits because that seemed to be an issue if you were listening to all the interviews and reports. Had a decent game last week, 80 yards and a touchdown. Then Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy's return. Everyone assumed that Tim Patrick would be the one to be hurt by this. Instead, this week it was Courtland Sutton. So Tim Patrick had another decent game being in the middle between the two. For me, it just feels like this is just a very much more poor version of the Tampa Bay offense where there's 3 wide receivers. One of them will probably have about a week. In this case, there's 3 wide receivers for the Broncos. One of them will probably have a worse week than the other 2, but The other two might not even have great weeks to begin with, just because Teddy Bridgewater can't support more than 2 wide receivers at a time. At least that's what we've seen over the past 2 years from him leading an offense. Some streaming options of the week. This is your quarterbacks, your tight ends, some defenses. I'm going to throw Kirk Cousins back out there versus the Chargers. The Chargers are dealing with injuries at defensive backs. You have Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and Dalvin Cook. Kirk Cousins had a good game last week. I could see him having another good game versus the Chargers. Matt Ryan's been hot and cold. They're playing against the Cowboys. I think the benefit is there's no number one guy on the Falcons offense to now key out. So that means Matt Ryan can throw it almost anyone at this point. I think you're going to have to get lucky because the Cowboys defense has shown that it can't step up this year. They just got obliterated on the ground by the Broncos. So you're basically taking a 50-50 shot on Matt Ryan. But I think the most consistent of the bunch right now, who could be out there in free agency, is Carson Wentz versus the Jaguars. He's 3 straight games of 20 plus points. Michael Pittman has emerged. They're throwing the ball to Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines. Carson Wentz hasn't been making too many mistakes, except for this highlighted mistake last week versus the Titans. But an interception is just 1 or 2 points off. Carson Wentz has been putting up air yards. It doesn't feel good playing Carson Wentz, but you could do a lot worse than playing Carson Wentz this week. At tight end, if Pat Freiermuth is still there, definitely worth playing. Jared Cook hasn't been pretty this year, but he still gets at least 5 targets per game, where that's decent for a tight end. And then I feel like he's been the number one streamer each week for whoever has a tight end bye. But Tyler Conklin has been a consistent 7 to 8 points the past few weeks at tight end. He gets 5 to 6 targets a game for about 50 to 60 yards. That is the definition of your average tight end 1. Playing against the Chargers, he could just be that easy dump off play that the Kirk Cousins loves, and he could easily just catch a touchdown out of nowhere if Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen are both being covered. He's just someone you could just throw into your lineup and know that he's going to get you at least 6 points and maybe a little bit more. Then on defense, there's only 2 decent pickups this week. If they're out there, Baltimore versus Miami. We saw Miami be absolutely terrible with Jacoby Brissett being forced back into the lineup at the last second. If Tua is still out, then on a short week, Miami versus Baltimore, that's a good look up for Miami. Sorry, that's a good look for the Ravens. Don't play Miami against the Ravens. That'd be a terrible day for defense. But Cleveland versus the Patriots could be another option if they're out there. Now, the Patriots looked like they did a lot better last week, but if you take away that touchdown they got on defense, they only scored a few times. So the Cleveland defense can shut down an offense. We've seen this defense score a ton of points with sacks and picks and fumbles. I don't believe in the Patriots offense enough where they're going to light up Cleveland. And you could be in for a day where you get 5 to 8 points just based off the Patriots not scoring a ton of points and just the team getting enough sacks and maybe a turnover or two, where you're probably not going to get a defensive touchdown unless Mac Jones makes a terrible rookie mistake or a player fumbles close to the end zone. So you could be in for a mediocre day defensively with the Cleveland Browns, but I don't think you're going to get gouged and you're going to end up with the 0 or 2 points like the Saints did this past week. And that just kind of wraps us up. It was a really short episode today. If you have any other questions or you wanted some things you want to know or things we could discuss before going into the final few weeks, there's 5 weeks left in the regular fantasy season. So if you're down and out at 2-7, there is still a very slim chance you could make playoffs. You just need a lot to go right for yourself and a lot to go wrong for other teams. Unfortunately, if at this point you are 1-8 or 0-9, you're most likely already looking forward to next season. So don't drop your players because that'll just create an unfair advantage to anyone else in the league. Also, don't trade away players for nothing because then it just gets to the situation where people are just going to try to take advantage and make unfair teams. So just basically lock your players. Don't release them. You could still try to ruin someone's day that's trying to get into fantasy playoffs if that's your goal and that's what you like to try to go for. But at the end of the day, fantasy is fickle. You're not always going to have a great year or a great week, but that's just the love of football. You just got to embrace it, enjoy it, and look forward to the next season. So as always,